Chengeto was the finest blacksmith in all the kingdoms around, but one fine summer he watched a fire devour his lover, and he vowed never to love again. Hi there, Paul. A long time ago in a faraway land, a young man helplessly watched the love of his life succumb to a fire, an event that would haunt his days and his nights to an extent that he would never look at a woman again. Until one spring afternoon, when a beautiful healer entered his chambers. Before he met the healer, Chengeto had been engaged to marry Mucha, the kingdom's skin tanner's daughter. Their love had been slow in coming, as they had grown up together, playing the same Mahumbwe games, and therefore taking each other for granted, for somehow they thought they would always be in each other's lives. As young children, the two had mercilessly teased each other and always had looked for an opportunity to fight, with the other children encouraging the juvenile rivalry by constructing two mounds of soil onto the ground, saying the mounds represented either mother's breast, and whoever kicked a mound would be inviting a fight. And Mocha, arms crossed over her rib cage, and her face a mixture of arrogance and attitude, would be the first to kick, and 7 rains old Chengeto, provoked, would pounce. But as they had grown into adulthood, they had grown incredibly close, always hanging out in each other's space, dancing together at kingdom festivals, and gravitating into private conversations even when they were in the presence of their friends. And then those conversations transformed into stolen glances. At one point, Mucha would feel his eyes upon her, and she would look up, but then he would quickly grin and look away, as though he had not been watching. Mucha, too, the moment he was not looking, would rest her gaze on him, and enchanted, mesmerized, her eyes would take all of him in, lingering on his tall, muscular frame and his well-sculpted face. And when Chengeto felt her gaze on him, he would look over at her, grin and wink, and continue with whatever he was up to. Chengeto was the one who told her that he had fallen in love with her, and with their family's permission, of course, wanted to court her. Mucha's family had had no qualms. Chengeto was not only well-to-do, he was a hard worker and respectful, and any parents of young women in the kingdom would have wanted him for their daughter. So the courtship began, and in his shed where Chengeto forged iron into hoes and axes for clients, he would always have a side project where for his love he forged ankle chains, bracelets, rings, lockets, for Mucha. And as the day set aside for the Aurora ceremony where he, Chengeto, would appreciate Mucha's parents for his wife to be with cows, he decided to create a gift like no other piece of iron he had ever forged. He gathered the best pieces of iron he could find and sought gold pieces from the goldsmith and began to work on the gift. In the mornings, he completed his orders, but in the afternoons, he set aside time for his gift, placing the iron into the red-hot fire, waiting for it to turn molten. Then once it was hot and pliable, he would fashion it into an exquisite oil lamp, strategically placing the pieces of gold into the lamp so that when eventually it would be lit, it would shimmer and glow in any room. 2 days before the Aurora ceremony, he presented the gift to his bride-to-be, and she had jumped for joy, for when she held it, she felt the weight of its love and care in all its grooves and bumps. And later that night, as she sat in her heart, she had filled it with oil and set a match on it, and watched with satisfaction as her room transformed into a shimmery glow that danced as the flame was blown on by a soft breeze from the window. When she had woken up later, in the middle of the night, Mucha had at first been enthralled by the dancing glow in her room, for it was brighter now, pinkish, almost red, and she had smiled to herself. But then she quickly remembered that she had been woken up by something uncomfortable. She was hot and sweating, and as she looked around to see whether the window was open, her eye caught the sight of the vociferous flame that had emanated from the oil lamp, and which was now licking her wooden door and the thatch above it. Mucha screamed, quickly looking around for an exit, but she saw that the window was too high up and too narrow to contain her bulging hips, and she would be stuck up there forever. So she decided to make a dash for the door, hoping she would be quick enough to flash through it with minimal bends. But as she ran, her foot caught on the corner of the bed, and she stumbled and fell, her face falling straight into the flame, and seconds later, a pole that supported the roof had fallen onto her back, pinning her to the ground forever. Shengeto was roused from his tired sleep by the screams of "Fire! Fire!" as feet rushed past his hut, which sat by the edge of the homestead, closer to the village path. Though he was tired and could feel the lag in his feet and in his body, he forced himself to rise, to follow the runners, for he knew that any tragedy in the kingdom was everyone's personal responsibility. At first, he followed, his eyes and his mind too blurry to register where he was going. But soon enough, he began to feel the smoke in his nose and the crackle and spit of angry flame in the distance. When he looked up, he had not expected to find the fire in the direction of his fiancée's heart, and all sleep gone, knowing that they were soon to be family. He increased his pace to rush and help them. He heard Mucha's screams way before he reached the compound, and that only served to increase his pace. And when he got into the compound, he saw it was her heart that had been consumed by the fire, and he shoved his way through the crowd and through the men and women pouring pails of water onto the flames that only rose higher and higher with any douse of water. He ignored them all and ran straight to what had been the door of the hut, but was now a roaring blaze, and he called out to the screams, "I am coming, my love," as he prepared to leap over the tongues of flame. But someone grabbed his hand, restraining him, holding him back, shouting, "You can't go in there." Shengeto fought with the restrainer, using all the strength in his body, and when he finally broke free, he charged again towards the blaze, its heat already on his face, singing his beard. But more hands were grabbing him now, and try as hard as he could not escape their grips. He screamed at them to let him go, his screams matching those of Mucha, but nobody listened to him, but simply tightened their grips on his arms, until he could hear Mucha's screams growing fainter and fainter, and until at last they silenced, and in that moment Chengeto's heart had also died. That had been 8 years ago, and yet Chengeto's heart had never opened again, for anything, for anyone. He had come to hate his hands that had made the wretched lamp. He had come to loathe the iron, the element that had given him a name and a reputation and a job. He had come to hate the fire, the property that cemented his designs. And the only thing that had kept him from not abandoning his workshed altogether was that he had to eat, and he had his aging widowed mother dependent on him. So he had gone to his shed, yet his attempts at work were half-hearted at best, and he knew he was slowly losing his role as the best blacksmith in all the kingdoms surrounding theirs to younger blacksmiths. He did not notice when the orders started to dwindle, and that the few orders he received were from kind neighbors and relatives who did so out of pity. But it was the love tokens and emblems he had come to hate the most, for in their culture there was the practice of nduma, where a young man courting a young woman would give her something of value to show that he intended to betroth her in the future, and the young woman would also do the same. So traditionally, Dumas had made a large part of his orders, as he had had to make loquats, tiny huts, bracelets, rings, and ankle chains for his customers. But since Muchai had passed, Chengeto had been unable to make even the simplest of lockets or rings. Whenever he had placed them into the fire and waited for the right time for them to solidify into perfect trinkets, they had broken, crumbling under his tongs as he took them out of the fire, or cracking oddly once out of the fire. It became so bad that he vowed never to make a love token again. I think I am cursed, Amai, he told his mother one afternoon after a ring had come out perfectly out of the fire, but the moment that he had set it down, cracks had started to appear. I think Mucha's passing left a curse in me that will forever make it difficult for me to create a good Nduma. Those screams of pain, Amai, those last screams of her in the heart, they cursed me. She knows that had it not been for that wretched lamp, there would not have been an oil leak, and therefore she would have been alive. I am cursed, Amai. And there was nothing his mother could say that could make him feel better. For deep down, too, the old woman had come to believe that his son had been cursed, especially with those rumors floating around the kingdom. Then Fadzo had entered the kingdom. The granddaughter of a healer, Fadzo had been raised by her paternal grandmother in the nearby kingdom of Sorrow after her parents had passed when she was very little. But when she was 20 reigns old, her grandmother passed too, but not before telling her, "You have to go back to your paternal land of Gara, where your father's family hails from, and where your father owned land and livestock. I have been just a poor old woman, and you will have nothing else from me after I pass, except the gift of healing I imparted into you. The limited livestock that I have and the lands that I own will go to my brothers, and you will be left with nothing, for your birthright is with your father. So go back to Gara and reclaim the land that your father owned." His livestock was added to the royal head, but once you prove your identity, it will be given back to you. After you bury me, go to your land. And so Fadzo, with only the pouch of poultices and potions on your back and the knowledge of diseases and herbs in your head, had returned to her ancestral home. But on the day she arrived, she had run into full-length blown-up conflict. For that afternoon, a gang of fearless bandits had entered the marketplace in Gara and held hostage a group of young boys and girls who had been playing Raka Raka, and were demanding that for the young children to be released unscathed, the king would have to release his stash of gold for them. The king had come and told the bandits that if they released the children, then he himself would lead them to the kingdom's treasury. And because his voice was soft and his face was kind, the bandits believed him, and leaving the children, followed the king. Yet the bandits had not known they would be walking into an ambush, and the strongest of Gara men would surround them and fight them to the last inches of their lives. So Fazo, seeing the battle begin, had known that her healing expertise would be called for, so she stood by the fringes of the combat, shouting, "Bring the injured to me! Let me help you! I am a healer!" And the army grabbed their injured to this alien young woman, and she would rummage through her pouch for potions, poultices, herbs, and bandages, treating each of her patients with meticulous care to ensure that the wounds would not be long-lasting and debilitating. But somewhere towards the end of the skirmish, when the standing bandits were beginning to lay their weapons to the ground and raise their hands up in surrender, a young man had been dragged to Fado's little camp by the side of the road. The young man had suffered a deep gash to his thigh, and blood was spouting out of it like a small spring, and Fado could tell by the tears in the young man's eyes that he was already slipping away. Quickly, she tore the Musasa bandage in her pouch and tied it above his wound, tightening the bandage to cut the flow of blood to the leg. Then she reached into her bag for the clothing salve which she had used for the other soldiers, and only a little remained. But she applied the remaining on the wound anyway, praying that the now trickling blood would stop, and when she would release the bandage, the blood would have clotted and the wound would not bleed again, for there was nothing else to apply on the bleeding leg in her pouch. Then quickly she poured a dollop of blood restoration potion into a gourd, called for water, which someone brought, added the water, stirred the mixture with her fingers, and went to his head where she tilted it and coaxed his mouth open to drink the potion. He drank the potion, and when he was done, he looked at her with a dazed expression, then said in a low voice, "Beautiful woman, don't waste your efforts on me. If the Maker calls me to come, then it is time for me to come." But all she said was, "Shh, don't speak like that. You shall heal." Yet the young man did not heal. For 2 weeks he drifted in and out of consciousness. Fanzo could not leave his side to go and stake the claim to her land. Other healers were called, but none of them could find a solution on how to stop the springing of blood whenever the bandage was removed. So Fanzo knew that although she could replenish the loss of blood with the blood restoration potion, she could not stop the stubborn blood fall. She was new to the kingdom and did not know where to find the herbs for the blood clotting salve, and the few moments she managed to steal into the forest to look for the plant, she could not find it. Part of her was beginning to want to give up, to listen to the young man who she was treating from the floor of his blacksmithing hut, who whenever he awoke would say, "Let me go, please, release me from my agony, please, release me from this senseless world." But Fazo only had to remind herself what her grandmother would do in a circumstance such as this, and that would be enough to spur her to work harder to let the man leave. Shingeto would see her, Mucha, whenever he closed his eyes. He would see her from her back and recognize her from her hair, which had always been burned atop her head, from her womanly shape, and from her strong and tough shins. Excitedly, he would call for her, ask her to turn so he could see her face again, ask her to come to him, for a dead weight was pulling him down, but Mucha's back remained resolutely turned, refusing to budge at his calls, and after a while, deflated, he would give up and return to his world, which still felt devoid without her. But always, what would surprise him when he opened his eyes was that he would look into the kindest face he had ever seen, and the face would tell him that it was okay, and he was getting better, and he would be up and about again very soon. And true too, as time went by, he began to see Mucha's frame less and less often, and though he ached to see her again, he could finally distinguish reality from dreams around him, and he knew he had survived. He learned that he had been down for a moon the first day the kind face helped him sit up. "I thought we would lose you," she told him. "Who are you?" he asked her. He learned she was a healer who had come to reclaim her father's lands. 2 days later, she helped him take a walk around the homestead, and when they finally sat back in his shed, he was sweaty and out of breath from the exercise on his too painful leg, but she was happy. "I have no doubt you will make a full recovery," Fazo told him, "but for now, I will have to leave you to fulfill what I came here for. Just continue taking this portion as I instructed you until you feel you are fit, okay?" Shingeto nodded and watched as she packed their bags. Then when she got to the door and waved him goodbye one last time, he said, "Ma'am, you have not told me your name." Fazo smiled and said, "I am Fazo of the Guture family. Goodbye," and she stepped out. Chengeto felt bereft after she left. In the few lucid days he had interacted with her, he felt she had brought with her a lightness to his dark heart, and for the first time since the fateful fire, he felt as though the soreness in his heart had become duller and was now just an echo of fond remembrance rather than a gut-wrench of bereavement. In the days he got better and started to walk again, a part of him wanted to see her again, to go to the Guture lands to find her, to see if there was indeed a flicker of a long-forgotten flame in his heart, or that was simply the gratitude of having had his heart saved by the stranger. But it was only the thought of Mucha, the thought he wanted to preserve, that reined him in. He noticed too that there was a renewed vigor in his work, and that whatever tool he put his focus on came out perfectly. It feels like I have been reborn, he told his mother one afternoon when she visited his shed and found him whistling a happy tune as he lifted some iron with his tongue bar. The older woman smiled, grateful that the melancholy that had closeted his son for years had begun to lift. Anyway, she said to her son, I was just outside with the royal messenger. He came with a message from the king. Tomorrow, they are hosting an award ceremony for bravery, and you have been invited for the role you carried out in swiftly responding to the call for soldiers and for bringing your weapons with you on the day the banditry arrived. So the king wants to honor you for that service you gave the kingdom. The following morning, Chingeto arrived at the royal courtyard wearing his best clothes and was immediately ushered to a seat right next to the king's seat on the royal dining table. He looked up as he sat, and his heart jolted at the sight before him, for there, sitting opposite and waiting for the king too, was Fadzo, the healer who had not given up on him. She smiled at him radiantly when their eyes met and said with the utmost kindness in her voice, I am glad you are better, Chengeto. I see even the limp on your leg is gone. I would not have healed had it not been for your expertise. I am forever indebted to your willingness to fight for me. She smiled wider. It is my job, she said. Still, he said, I would like to show my gratitude for it, if you will allow me to visit you some day soon. The words were out of his mouth before he thought about them, and you wondered how she would take his brazeness to suggest a visit. But she nodded and said, My home is open to you at any time. And so Chengeto visited her a week after the awards ceremony with a tiny bracelet in his pocket. It had been a tough exercise crafting it, as he remembered how every love token had either crumbled or cracked under his fingers. But this time he had been careful with the iron, the tongs, the fire, and the expertly crafted chain had emerged with not even a line in its structure, and as he had pocketed it, he knew it had not been a curse that had led to the fractures. It had been his pain, his anger at himself, his regrets that had taunted him for making the lamp, his failure to forgive himself. And now, here he was, slowly letting go of the past, allowing himself to live again, and an exquisite chain had been created. That first afternoon, they talked until their voice boxes tired, even though they were still a repository of stories to tell. He returned again a couple of days later with a small locket, then another couple of days later, and again, until the whole kingdom knew and would not stop commenting on how smitten the two of them were, even though they maintained they were friends. One afternoon, as they sat in the shade of a tree in Fadzo's homestead, watching the head boy bring in her herd of cows and goats that had grown to their hundreds since her parents' passing, Chengeto had decided to pour his heart out to her, telling her of his love and the devastating fire that had stolen her away. I never thought I would ever love again, he said. I told myself that it would be impossible for me. But then I met you. and my heart is overflowing with emotions I had forgotten existed. I have fallen in love with you, Fazo, and I would be delighted if you would allow me to be yours. Fazo looked into his eyes and a small smile played across her lips. Then she said, I have come to appreciate you and your presence in the past moons as I have dealt with the grief of losing my grandmother and the newness of settling into a foreign land. And yes, it is my desire to be with you as you have brought me calmness and ease in the last few moons. His smile grew wider, and his palms lifted to her cheeks, and he whispered, I love you, as he bent his head to kiss her forehead. I love you too, she said, smiling up at him. The end. Thank you guys for watching the story to the end. There are also many other African romance stories that you can immerse yourself in here, and all you need to is click the playlist above or browse the channel. Also, if you can, please do leave a like or a comment or a subscription. Bye for the meantime. Lots of love and see you in the next one. Goodbye.